forefront of the debate around that AI innovation since its inception. I talked with him just before the holiday to discuss the measures the tech giant is taking to develop this tool responsibly and to employ better safeguards against bad actors. Sundar Pichai, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Shannon, great to be. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I know a bit of your story from childhood, that you were very impacted by even the most basic technology that came along. And I gotta wonder, did you ever imagine you'd be leading a company that is doing things like, listen, this morning on my way to work was the first time I had a Waymo driverless ride-sharing car pass me on the interstate, but other things and new boundaries and frontiers and pioneering that you're doing. Did you ever imagine that as a kid?
Definitely not. I did want to work on technology, but I didn't quite expect what I would be doing today now.
Well, you are in the front of a lot of what's happening in technology, including in AI. We know there are enormous benefits, things like, finding medical cures and automating processes to make life better. But we know there's a dark side to a lot of this, too. So knowing what you know, a much better understanding even than I have, or many Americans or folks around the world, what is it that keeps you up at night when you think about the use of artificial intelligence?
Well, any technology, has a dual side to it. Obviously, with a powerful technology like AI, there are so many benefits we can think of. One day this is going to help us maybe discover new drugs, develop better treatments for cancer, and so on. But as you rightly say, it could be used by bad actors. It could create like deep fakes in a way we won't be able to tell the difference. So those are the kind of things you sit and think about. And the journey of humanity is always, how do you harness technology to benefit society? And I think this technology is no different.
So I want to talk about something Axios said to that point, and some of what you mentioned there. They said AI is rewriting the playbook for crime, from cheap deepfake scams and AI-written ransomware to mass identity hijacks and critical infrastructure hacks. They go on to say AI can create automations to lockpick into a system millions of times per second, something humans can't do. How do we put controls on that kind of use of this technology?
Well, the answer turns out to be is you want to use AI on the defense side too. So the same way bad actors can use AI, we can also use AI to better detect those operations. In fact, just today, the court ruled in our favor against a phishing operator. They had impacted lighthouse operations. They had impacted over 1 million people in over 100 countries with effectively, scam calls. But, we use AI to detect these bad actors, too. So I think you want to use it both ways. One other example is we now have the ability, it's called SynthID.
Is this real or AI generated? Sometimes it can be difficult to tell.
You can use it to detect video generated using AI. So us being able to detect and understand whether something was created naturally or was created using AI is an example of how we can cope with these trends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like that would be enormously helpful as we see things that are used in political ads and news stories, and being able to detect when that actually is not something that factually happened. That's good news. Now, a little bit more bad news here. In recent days, we've been covering this case of hackers that are alleged to be either working with China or sanctioned by China, using Anthropic's AI technology to carry out these hacks that had very little human intervention at all. It was really powered by AI. Google, of course, has a substantial investment in Anthropic. So any news on that front and worries about these hackers being able to use them for nefarious means?
I mean, look, these are all examples of we have to up our game in terms of the security and the safety frameworks we build around our products. But over time, for some of this global, we need countries to start working together to develop international frameworks of cooperation so that we don't weaponize these technologies against each other. So part of it is us as companies making our products better. Part of it is governments working together to create standards and frameworks by which we all use the technology in a cooperative way. So we're going to need both of that.
Yeah, and that gets me to this question of regulation. There are those who worry that if the U.S. government, Capitol Hill, folks here in Washington, do too much regulation, that China will run ahead of us with a lot of this technology. But there are others who will point to social media, for example, and say there were no good guardrails before it got completely beyond what lawmakers feel like would be more appropriate controls. So do you think there should be regulation? What body or who should be carrying out the regulatory process?
It's a great question. Look, it's an important technology, and I do think we need a balance. I mean, we both need to support the innovation. As you said, this is technology which will affect our national security, our economic leadership. So we need to make progress. So you need a pro-innovative framework, but we need to have guardrails. I think it's really important, first, not to be duplicative. Many sectors are already regulated. So, for example, if you're going to use AI in healthcare, the existing regulation in healthcare serves as a foundational framework. So we want to be balanced there. I do think it's important this is done at the national level. Right now, there are over 1,000 bills going through the state legislatures all across the U.S. So you can imagine that creates a patchwork of regulations which would really affect innovation, because for a small company, for a startup, how do you cope up with those varied regulations? And how do you compete with countries like China, which are moving fast in this technology? So I think we have to get the balance right. We have to make sure we are able to innovate, and I think it's better done at the national level.
Okay, so let's talk about energy production. That's a big part of this conversation. We can see where you're standing there. You have just announced there in Texas tens of billions of dollars of investment in infrastructure to keep AI running, but critics have worries about the impact on the environment. I want to read something from the United Nations Environment Program. They put it this way about these data centers running AI. They said they're large consumers of water, which is becoming more scarce in many places. They rely on critical minerals and rare elements, which are often mined unsustainably, and they use massive amounts of electricity, spurring the emission of planet-warming greenhouse gases. Now, I read just days ago about a Google project called Suncatcher would actually use satellites in orbit to create and harness some of this energy. I had to frankly Google it to see if it was a real story or whether I was being punked. Tell us about this technology.
Look, I mean, over time, at Google, we're always proud of taking moonshots. You mentioned Waymo earlier. You know, that's been over a decade in the making. We're working on quantum computing. In that spirit, one of our moonshots is to how do we one day have data centers in space so that we can better harness the energy from the sun? You know, that is 100 trillion times more energy than what we produce in all of Earth today. So we want to put these data centers in space, closer to the sun, and I think we are taking our first step in 27. We'll send tiny racks of machines and have them in satellites, test them out, and then start scaling from there. But there's no doubt to me that a decade or so away, we'll be viewing it as a more normal way to build data centers.
Well, and so much of this, as you say, it's a normal way of life for a lot of young people to use AI, whether it's researching, studying, writing papers. But do you worry that it's kind of short-circuiting the independence of human thought, just kind of that intangible ingredient that comes from human exploration and ideas and thinking outside of the box? If people become so dependent on putting together a great query so they can find the answer they want, but not really being pushed to do any of their own introspection or thinking beyond normal parameters?
You know, if I were to, about 25 years ago, people were asking the same questions about Google search. That if kids could go to Google and just find the answer, would they be able to learn something? Would it affect how they think and learn? And the answer is no. These are tools which we can see already people adapting, using them. For example, in YouTube now, every creator has access to AI tools. So if you're a single mom, using your spare time and you have a cooking show on YouTube, with the AI, you have the same tools which maybe only a movie studio could have had in your hands. So I think humans will use these tools to express themselves even more, and I would predict will unleash more creative potential than we've ever seen before. And I think on the consumption side, humans will also value those unique experiences with the human touch. And so I think as a society, we will adapt. And I expect our creative days are going to be even more richer in the future.
Well, when AI can come to my house and actually cook that dinner, I'll be in much better shape. I could use the help. Senator Pichai, thank you very much for your time. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Shannon. Real pleasure.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany.
I think it's Sundar Pichai. I think that's his name. And next, we're going to get right into it with, I think it's Dario Amodei. Yes, I think we're going to do some of that. But I did want to say there was a very nice comment either made by a person named Gino Norman, 4231, hopefully, and says that they need to make a law labeling every fake video as AI. Okay. I think that's going to be more like a policy. I think that's going to be closer to a policy. I don't see anything wrong with maybe desiring that as a policy. I think that I don't know, the fake part. Like you could have real videos that are fake, and you could have AI videos that are fake. So I think the fake labeling, I don't know how they would do that. I don't know how you get away from fake to fiction or whatever just because you're created in AI. Like, where does embellishment stop and the truth start? Where does hyperbole stop and the truth starts? Like right now, if you look at me right now, I'm nothing to look at. But if you look at me right now, and it's like an infrared, it's like an inverted version of me, right? So I'll turn it off for a minute just to make a small little point. Now, some people might say, oh, you showing yourself like that, or you're hiding yourself like that. You're a fake. You know, you're like an AI fake right now. So I'll go to none real quick, right? Or I'll go to something like dramatic or action movie, different things like that. Let me see, Sepatone. So that, like that. So now look at me in that Sepatone, right? In that Sepatone, you can see me, but it's just a filter. That's all it is. It's just a filter. So I don't know what the bigger difference is because, hey, look at it this way. I don't know how to create a avatar for myself, but I understand the avatar, some of them, right? But I don't know how to create one for myself. So the closest thing to me to creating the avatar for myself is I go into my filter and I transform myself to something like a inverted. And when I go here and I just click on inverted, look what happens. There you go. I'm infrared. You can't see my face. I could be the avatar. I could just be acting crazy, moving through the spaces, turning on lights, turning off lights. I know I sound crazy. It sounds retarded. But what I'm saying is sometimes it's not what it's called. It's what it is. Sometimes it's not the packaging. It's what the use case is. That's what I'm getting at. And so people may not have the proper labeling, but the use case is legit. I just thought it was an interesting take on that. But I want to get to, I thought it was my man from CNBC. Where is he? And he's going to get into it with my man Dario Amodei from Anthropic, man. I mean, this is a pretty good piece. It actually took place today. I don't know if they're going to give me a copyright for playing it, but I'm going to play it anyway because I think it was very, very interesting. But before I go there, just to speak, Code Red. What was the Code Red? It was a leaked memo that came out of Sam Altman's OpenAI company about they need to get busy and work on what needs to happen because Google might be taking their spot. So there was a leak about Sam Altman, founder, CEO of OpenAI, telling his engineers and everybody else, drop what you're doing. Yeah. If y'all remember back in the day, there was this hip hop song called Humpty Hump, where Humpty Hump said, stop what you're doing because I'm about to listen to sound, but don't ignore me. But here it is. OpenAI is on alert. They like, hold up. Everybody drop what they doing because that damn Gemini 3, Google released Gemini 3, and I've been using it, and it's pretty cool. But check out the crisis over there at OpenAI.
The release of Google's updated Gemini 3 AI model last month has driven user growth. It has also prompted OpenAI CEO Sam Altman to reportedly declare a, quote, code red to improve the quality of its chatbot, ChatGPT. Our next guest says that has also touched off a civil war within AI, further carving a divide between those supporting the Google complex and the OpenAI complex. Joining me now, Michael O'Rourke, Jones Trading Chief Market Strategist. Mike, great to see you again. Thanks for sticking with us. So, we have talked before about your belief that indeed AI is trading in a bubble here. And we've gotten more headlines like this where there is more competition within the AI space. It seems like bulls have sort of been betting on everything to win, right? That it's a big enough pie that everybody will get a slice. Is that the way that people should be thinking about it?
I don't think that's the way people should be thinking about it. But we've developed this pattern in the past 15 years or so, is that when a leader comes about in the technology space, it seems to be a winner-take-all proposition. And so investors are willing to pay extremely high multiples, especially in the early stages, because you're expecting the company to own the space in the long term, and you're going to make it up as time passes. But I think what the events of the past few weeks have shown, where Google came out of nowhere, out of left field with Gemini 3, all of a sudden it leapfrogged OpenAI to have the best performing LLM, and then in parallel to that, they have their own TPUs that's where they trained Gemini 3 on, and that's performed really well. And of course, they're a lot cheaper than NVIDIA's GPUs. And while all these companies, right now, there's of course room for all these companies in the space that's growing, but it does make you think, well, obviously success breeds competition. And what you're going to see is I would say it's almost a blood sport between the largest, most capitalized organizations in the world finally competing with one another. And that's where the risk is, because they're going to be trying to outspend each other and outdo one another in order to win this space. And traditionally, they've generally had weaker competition, not the largest organizations in the world. So
what we've seen in the markets as of late, with the NASDAQ pulling back, right? It hasn't been a huge pullback from the highs. It's something like 3%. Does that bring a little more rationality into this? Or do you think that there is still a long way down potentially to go?
I think it brings a little more rationality in the sense of what we've seen is rotation into Google and Broadcom, as there's been some profit taking in NVIDIA and the likes of Oracle, who's partnered with OpenAI. So you're seeing rotation, which is healthy, because at least investors are recognizing that there are risks that someone else can come out, again, another player or someone else can come in and make a big move somewhere. And that's good that investors are at least acknowledging there's risk out there. But in the same respect, we're pricing in many cases, forward earnings for the next several years based on forecasts and projections. I mean, I think one of the market's biggest or investors' biggest problems with everything that OpenAI has done is having $1.4 trillion in spending commitments that are integrated in the order books of all the major technology firms in the world, for that matter, and they're unsure if OpenAI is going to be able to make good on those commitments. And then all of a sudden, you have something like Google jump ahead. It raises further doubts. So I think that's where the risk is. Yeah, we know the earnings estimates are good. We know the forecasts are good, but everything has to be taken with a big grain of salt at this point in time, because the landscape shifted in the past couple of weeks.
Well, and into this environment, it looks like the Fed might cut rates, right, at its meeting. And in past situations where we have a somewhat speculative environment, even if the rate cut is expected, is there a risk of putting fuel on the fire here?
I think there's a little bit of a risk. Honestly, the Fed has kind of made itself an irrelevant institution at this point in time. We have a massive balance sheet, which we finally have into some type of ample reserves balance, but it's still double the level it was, prior to the pandemic. So when things like economic data and events in the economy don't really matter to the Fed anymore, because again, we've had 2 insurance rate cuts. Now we're thinking of doing a 3rd insurance rate cut. The current unemployment rate is still lower than 74, 75% of monthly readings over the past 60, 70 years. It's just that the Fed's made itself irrelevant, and that is why change at the Fed's probably will be a good thing, next year. So it adds a little fuel to the fire, but I think that's a secondary factor here.
Fair enough, Mike. Good to see you. Thanks so much.
We awake to story today that OpenAI CEO Sam Altman is issuing some form of code red warning to his teams, basically wants to pick up the pace on development. What bothers me here, Tom, is that this company underpins the AI trade. It's linked up with AMD, it's linked up with NVIDIA, and if OpenAI is going to fall behind here, what does that mean to the broader AI ecosystem and the various trades that investors have fallen in love with?
Brian, you have hit the nail on the head, and this is what matters to investors in this story, right? The Google Gemini AI model is a huge deal because it threatens to make OpenAI and ChatGPT substantially less relevant. And here's why that matters for all of us. ChatGPT, OpenAI, has committed to spending over $1 trillion in the coming years to fund data center build out. If all of a sudden their revenue prospects dim because Google, which already has a presence everywhere, is going to become the dominant AI model player, then the outlook for ChatGPT just got a lot worse. That means they're not going to have the money to fund all of these commitments they've made, commitments which stocks have already rallied on. So if OpenAI, this is absolutely code red. This is code red for OpenAI. It's also code red for the AI enthusiasm trade. We need to see ChatGPT step up. Otherwise, it's not just OpenAI in the private market that risks dropping a lot. It's the whole AI ecosystem, and that would be a problem for the S&P 500.
Tom, if this is in fact code red for the broader AI ecosystem, I'm going to assume that a lot of people have already missed a pretty substantial move in Google. I'm going to swipe it off to the side for a second. Is this the moment where you go back to a name like Meta that is not reliant on OpenAI, that is spending billions of dollars on CapEx? The street didn't like that a couple weeks ago when they reported earnings, but here's a company growing its core Instagram business, Facebook, and going to be a major player in AI and doesn't necessarily need an OpenAI.
Yes, I think so. And that's what I think, again, this is such a big deal with Google stepping out with Gemini, is that you look at these well-capitalized mega cap tech companies, they don't need to worry about finding funding to pay for all the things they've committed to. They can do that from cash flow and from a very, very favorable debt market. So I do like Meta as a tangential from a Google.
Inez, over to you. What concerns me here, amongst everything that I was just mentioning, is a company like AMD. They came out a couple months ago, signed a big deal with OpenAI. The stock shot up. Immediately you thought AMD is going to be raking billions of dollars from OpenAI. They're also going to have an investor in the form of OpenAI. I believe it's a potential 10% stake over time. That bothers me. If OpenAI can't deliver right now, if you're an AMD shareholder, you got to be quaking in your boots.
Yes, and look, when you saw that the stock reaction when the report on the Google and Meta potential deal with their TPUs, the Google AI chips, you saw that NVIDIA fell on that day, and AMD did as well. The fact that you have Alphabet or Google that is it has its TPU chips, which they don't necessarily, okay, fine, they don't compete directly with NVIDIA's GPUs, but certainly this is sort of a diversification play for them. And the fact that you also have their Google Gemini, which has been integrated into Google. What's very interesting is that the street had been concerned that ChatGPT was going to displace Google search, yet Google was able to integrate Google Gemini into its Google search, and it still has the best of both worlds, because if you're going to use Google search, you're going to probably use it to look for a local handyman, right? And that still goes with
Fox Business Alert is the OG AI chatbot creator starting to worry that it's losing its lead in the AI arms race. According to the Wall Street Journal, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman declared in a company-wide memo a, quote, code red on improving the quality of ChatGPT as it faces growing competition from one particular name. The Journal says of particular concern to Altman is Google, which released a new version of its Gemini AI model last month that surpassed OpenAI on industry benchmark tests and sent the search giant stock soaring. But maybe it's not just Google OpenAI should be worried about. Amazon Web Services just unveiled a whole slew of new AI tools at its reInvent conference that has taken over just about every venue in Las Vegas today. One of those tools includes 3 new frontier agents that will revolutionize how customers can build, secure, and operate software. It also unveiled its new Trainium chips. Joining me now to break down all of these developments live from the AWS reInvent conference in Las Vegas is the top guy himself, Amazon Web Services CEO Matt Garman. Matt, first, I got to ask you about blowing up these legacy old tech servers. We can show people the video, but that was hilarious. You dynamited, if that's a verb, you dynamited this gigantic piece of old equipment. Why?
Yeah, it's an ode to all of our customers who are really focused on getting out from their legacy systems, and there's a bunch of people who are working hard to get off of Windows, to get off of VMware, and we've built a bunch of AI agents to help them with that. And so this was an ode to that, and we've seen massive sets of customers all around the world getting off of those legacy technologies and moving to the cloud. And this was kind of a fun way to show that.
Yeah, it was. But written on the actual server was the term tech debt. A lot of people are worried about actual debt right now that some of these companies are going to, but that's not what you meant. Describe what you say is tech debt and what you have unveiled to actually eliminate that.
Yeah, tech debt is this, there's many companies out there where most of their costs and most of their resources go to supporting their old legacy technologies. And they're unable to take advantage of many of the new technologies from AI and other things. And so as companies can get off of those technologies and move to the cloud, they get much more agile and they can focus on new technologies and delivering value to their customers. And the cloud is really an unlock in that. And so this tech debt, though, is there's still tons of customers who have these on-prem environments or they're stuck to these legacy technologies, whether it's Oracle or Windows or other things like that. And so this tech debt is a real drag on what a lot of people spend their money on today. And AI is helping us with AWS Transform to help get those customers off of those legacy platforms and help them get to more modern environments.
So when you say Oracle, let me just ask, because Oracle has NetSuite, which a lot of corporations use. It is old. It's still working, though. But what you're saying is some of that, and maybe IBM has old technology as well. And I would think that an Accenture, which helps companies merge to new things, should perhaps be threatened by what AWS is unveiling here.
No, actually, and our partners at folks like Accenture love this technology. It's in fact meant to be a technology that they can use to help companies get off of Oracle databases, to get off of things like NetSuite, to get off of things like Windows. Companies really desperately want to get off these and move to new technologies. And Accenture loves that there's tools that help them do that faster because it means that they can help more customers. And so they're actually big users of these AI agents that we build, and we partner deeply with them on that.
Also unveiled today is this AWS Nova Forge. As I understand it, this allows customers to build their own frontier AI models. And do what? Yeah. And why would that actually be something that will bring you a lot of enterprise customers?
Yeah, it turns out that when you talk to enterprises out there, a ton of them have mounds and mounds and mounds of enterprise data that they wish leading frontier models deeply understood. Because the more the model really understands your enterprise data, your workflows, and what you do, the better answers it can give you, particularly as you move to agents. But before today, that wasn't possible. With Nova Forge, we now take that data from customers and mix it into the early stages of training that model. So we give customers an early checkpoint, allow them to merge in their data together with an Amazon curated data set, and they can actually then retrain the rest of that model and have their own custom Nova model, frontier capable model that deeply understands just the information about their enterprise. And we're seeing customers get much, much better results for their core workloads than they would have otherwise from just off the shelf models.
And to run all of this stuff requires the electronic brains, the chips. AWS has been working on, Amazon's been working on the Trainium chip. And what did you unveil with that today? Because, of course, this is what started the whole Google run-up over the last week, because Google has these TPUs, which, of course, are the so-called tensor processing units, that they've got some deal with Meta, and that scared everybody about NVIDIA and OpenAI and all of this. But here comes the Trainium. What can it do that's better than anything out there?
Yeah. So when customers think about all of the AI that they want to accomplish, a lot of this comes down to they want to make sure that it's cost effective, right? If you're going to spend massive amounts of money to go and transform your organization with AI, we've got to get the cost down. And so for us, it's at every layer of the stack, we're focused on how do we drive cost and increase capabilities. And Trainium is a huge way of doing that. Trainium 3 is the most capable chip that we've ever produced. It gives you 3x more capabilities, 4x more capabilities. It can actually produce 5 times the number of tokens per megawatt of power that we used to be able to compute, that we used to be able to produce. And given that power and data centers are one of the scarce resources today, being able to produce 5 times as many tokens is a huge leap forward. We're really excited about rolling out Trainium 3, and we think it's going to be transformative to what people are able to accomplish as these models get bigger and bigger and more capable.
Matt, I know you're having fun out there in Vegas blowing up stuff. Oh my God, that's like a dream of a lot of people. I just want to explode things. But thank you very much. A lot of big announcements out of AWS. You guys are a machine.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you so much.
Through consumers, which kind of have their habits and their use cases, we look at our revenue. It's grown 10x a year, every year for the last 3 years. 0 to 100 million in 2023, 100 million to $1 billion in 2024, 1 billion to, it's going to land somewhere between 8 and 10 at New York. And, you know, it's
Day here. He is one of the most consequential people here in the world of artificial intelligence. He's the co-founder and CEO of Anthropic, of course, known for its Claude model. It's one of the fastest growing technology companies in history and uniquely backed now by all 3 giants, tech giants, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. That's new, at least one of them. And by the way, he has been at this really longer than most. He worked at Baidu, then Google, was an early employee at OpenAI, where he led the development of ChatGPT 2 and 3. And the reason that we wanted to speak with him this year, more than anything else, is because he has singularly been perhaps the most outspoken and candid person about AI when it comes to the way he's been thinking about jobs and job losses and selling chips to China and politics in our country and where all of this goes. So welcome to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We got a lot to talk about, including, by the way, are we in an AI bubble? But I promise you we will get there. I'll start here, though, which is, I mentioned you were a research scientist back at Baidu, 2014. And if I had sat with you then and said, we're going to sit together in 2025 talking about AI, you would have told me what? What would have been your expectation for what would have happened?
So I'll tell you what I am surprised by and what I'm not. I'm not surprised by the economic impacts of the technology, the value that it's creating, you know, the fact that, you know, I walk by any billboard in New York and, you know, it's kind of everything about AI.
You thought in 2014 that this would be real by now.
In some form that this would be real, that it would be central to the economy, that it would be central to national security, that it would be central to scientific research. I don't think I imagined that I would be leading one of the companies in the space, right? I think that would have been, you know, very surprising to me. I didn't think of that as kind of my role at the time, and the exact way in which things happened, all the kind of strange lingo we've developed around language models, all of the kind of financialization of it. You know, if you think about the implications of the models becoming as smart and as powerful as they are and scaling in the way that they are, in the way that me and some of my colleagues had predicted, it all makes sense. But I don't think I would have derived it from first principles.
Okay, well then let's go straight to the question I said I'd ask at the beginning, because maybe this is the place, thinking about where this goes and the fact that I didn't think you would say, by the way, that you thought that this is where we were going to be in 2025, because I think even people back then thought this would be a much longer road. But if you're right, do you look at the amount of economic muscle that's being put into this industry right now, I mean, it really does represent potentially almost all of the growth in the United States GDP right now, literally.
Yes.
That we are in some form of a bubble? Are we overspending? Does the math of all of this make sense?
So this is really complicated. And I want to separate out the technological side of it from the economic side of it. On the technological side of it, I feel really solid. I think I'm one of the most bullish people around, and I think it pencils out. On the economic side, you know, I have my concerns where even if the technology is you know, really powerful and fulfills all its promises, I think there may be players in the ecosystem who, if they just make a timing error, if they just get it off by a little bit, bad things could happen. So let me go through both of them. On the technological side, the reason that I'm not, honestly, by the pure technology, not that surprised is myself and some of the people who eventually became my co-founders, we were the first to document the scaling laws of AI, which is you put more compute, you put more data into AI with small modifications. We've seen these things like reasoning models and test time compute. They're all tiny little tweaks. And I've been watching that trend for the last 12 years or so since I joined the field. And the thing that is most striking about all of it is as you train these models in this very simple way, you know, with a few simple modifications, they get better and better at every task under the sun. They get better at coding. They get better at doing science. They get better at biomedicine. They get better at the law. They get better at finance. They get better at you know, materials and manufacturing. And that's just a listing of all the sources of value in our economy. If I just take Anthropic itself, which, because we work so much on the enterprise side, I think we're a good barometer, maybe a purer barometer than the others, which kind of filter through consumers, which kind of have their habits and their use cases. We look at our revenue. It's grown 10x a year, every year for the last 3 years. 0 to 100 million in 2023, 100 million to $1 billion in 2024, 1 billion to, it's going to land somewhere between 8 and 10 at the end of this year. Will it continue? I don't know, but the technology is driving there and the economic value is coming with it. It will, you know, that trend is going to slow down for sure, but it's still going to be really fast. And so I have this confidence that eventually the economic value is eventually the economic value is going to be there.
But let's just go to this, because there are companies that are spending $100 billion a year more. You're going to be spending 50. You look at what Sam Altman, who was here last year, plans to be spending. These are extraordinary numbers, and this is all a bet, a big bet, that this is going to scale in this way. And my question is there a real way to pencil this out, or is this more of a gut feeling at this point?
So so that really gets to the second part of it. And I will describe as transparently as I can, I think there's a real dilemma deriving from uncertainty in how quickly the economic value is going to grow and the lag times on building the data centers that drives it. So I think there's genuine uncertainty, there's genuine dilemma, which we as a company try to manage as responsibly as we can. And then I think there are some players who, you know, who are YOLOing, who pull the risk dial too far, and I'm very concerned.
Who is YOLOing?
So that's a question I'm not going to answer. So on the first one, put yourself.
We'll come back to that.
Put yourself. We won't. Put yourself in the position of Anthropic. Put yourself in my position. You've seen this revenue curve that goes up 10x a year for 3 years. You're like, okay, what's going to happen next year if I'm really dumb and I extrapolate the pattern 10 to 100 billion? I don't believe that. Just to be clear, I don't believe that at all. Even though it's happened in the last 3 years, just at this scale, I don't believe it. But that's one of the outer bounds of, you know, the outer limits of possibility. If I go in and I'm like, this enterprise and that enterprise and this use case and this is our go-to-market motion, if I try and do it, you know, bottom up, then, you know, maybe it's 20 or 30 or something like that. So there is what I've been calling internally this cone of uncertainty, where I don't know if a year from now it's going to be 20 billion or, you know, it's going to be 50 or like, you know, it's very uncertain. I try to plan in a conservative way, so I plan for the lower side of it. But that is very disconcerting. And you add to that the idea that building the data centers has a long lag time. It's like a year or two. So I have to decide now, literally now, or in some cases a few months ago, how much compute I need to buy in early 20 to serve the models in early 2027 when I get to that revenue amount. And there's two coupled dangers. One is that if I don't buy enough compute, I won't be able to serve all the customers I want. I'll have to turn them away and send them to my competitors. If I buy too much compute, of course, I might not get enough revenue to pay for that compute. And in the extreme case, there's kind of the risk of going bankrupt. And how much buffer there is in that cone, it's basically determined by my margins. If I have 80% margins, I can buy $20 billion of compute, and it could serve $100 billion of revenue. But because the cone is so wide, it's hard to avoid, making a mistake on one side or the other. Now, we've been a relatively responsible company, and I think because we focus on enterprise, I think we have a better business model. I think we have better margins. I think we're being responsible about it. But again, let's say you have a different business model. Let's say you have a consumer business model. Your kind of the source of your revenue isn't as good. Your margins aren't as certain. And let's say you're a person who just kind of like constitutionally just wants to YOLO things or just likes big numbers. Then you may turn that dial pretty far. And so I think there's a real underlying risk. Whenever there's uncertainty, there's a risk of overextension. We all face it. I face it. All the other companies face it. There's an inherent risk when the timing of the economic value is uncertain. There's an inherent risk of underreacting or overextension. And because the companies are competing with each other, and frankly, we genuinely need to compete with, our authoritarian adversaries. There's kind of a lot of pressure to push things. So I think there's some amount of irreducible risk here, and I absolutely don't want to deny this. But at the same time as that, I think there are some players who are not managing that risk well, who are taking unwise risks. So
okay,
I think
let me ask you about that with, maybe you'll mention who that is. I think we all know who that is. You have said that you're going to break even. This is privately, at least to your investors, by 2028, even with the spending plans, I think. Sam Altman, who you worked with and for, says that he's going to do it by 2030. I'll use his math, not yours. He would have to go from a $74 billion loss in the course of 2 years to being profitable 2 years later. Does that make sense to you?
So look, I don't know the internal financials of any other company. I can't say anything about what the economics of any other of any other company is. I will just go back to our own calculation and the cone of uncertainty where we basically say we want to buy enough compute that we're confident, even in the 10th percentile scenario, like might be in a bad position, but like we think we can pay for it. There's some end of the curve where things go so badly that we can't pay that there's always a tail risk. There's not zero, but we're trying to manage that risk well while also buying an amount of compute that allows us to be competitive with the other players. We're very efficient in training. We're very efficient in inference. We have good margins. I think we can manage it. I think the odds are on our side.
What are we supposed to think of what I think people now describe as circular deals?
Yes.
Back in the day, we called this vendor financing.
Yes.
But in this context, you have a situation where NVIDIA in particular, but others as well, effectively have been taking stakes in companies, and invariably, those companies are using some of that money one way or the other, considering money's fungible, and going to buy NVIDIA chips.
Yes. So, I mean, we've done some of these deals, not at the same scale as some other players, but we've done some of these deals, and I can just kind of walk you through not a specific deal because I'm not going to go into the details, but kind of like a stylized what these deals often look like and kind of why they can make sense. So, if you want to buy a gigawatt of compute, right? That buying the chips and building the chips, building everything, that costs, roughly, let's say, $50 billion of capital expense to kind of fund that. And you can think of that as the useful lifetime as people argue about it, but maybe it's 5 years. So that's $10 billion for basically for 5 years. And so if you're a company, you're a company that's making, $8-10 billion of revenue. You think that's growing. You don't know how fast it's growing. You have to make the decision right now, and you don't have $50 billion. You don't have $50 billion on you. So, a thing you can do, a deal you can make with a large player who has an incentive to do this because they're the one selling the chips or providing the cloud, is they'll say, okay, I'll give you, 20% of it. I'll invest $10 billion, so that lets you pay for the first year, and then for the other years you can kind of pay as you go, because I know you don't have $50 billion now, but looking at how things are growing, that isn't a crazy bet. We're already almost at the $10 billion of revenue. So it takes a year to build a data center. It's financed for a year. So you're basically saying I need to get $10 billion of revenue per year 2 years from now.
Right.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. One player has capital and has an interest because they're selling the chips, and the other player is pretty confident they'll have the revenue at the right time, but they don't have $50 billion at hand. So I don't think there's anything inappropriate about that in principle. Now, if you start stacking these where they get to huge amounts of money, and you're saying, by 2027 or 2028, I need to make $200 billion a year, then yeah, you can overextend yourself, of course.
Let me ask you.
It's all a matter of the size.
What I think is one of the key questions behind the math of this entire industry is what's called the depreciation schedule, if you will, for these chips. And there seems to be a big debate about it, meaning when you buy a new chip, is that chip going to work for you effectively for 3 or 4 years, or is it going to work for you for 6 or 7 or 8 years or even 10 years? And depending on where you think the math really lands, all of this pencils out or really doesn't. What do you think the schedule is?
So look, from our point of view, we make very conservative assumptions here. I don't think there's a particular depreciation schedule, right? When new chips come out, the issue isn't the lifetime of the chips. Chips keep working for a long time. The issue is new chips come out that are faster and cheaper, and
you may need them if your competitors have them.
Yeah, and so kind of the value of old chips goes down somewhat. In fact, that can happen a year after you buy the chips, because now there are multiple companies, TPUs, GPUs, coming out with new chips. So I think the way we think about it is we take into account that the old chips are going to be less valuable as time goes on, and we assume very aggressive kind of continuation of the chip efficiency curve. And again, I can only speak for Anthropic. Like, we make conservative assumptions here, and we think we're going to be okay in basically almost all worlds. Can't be literally all worlds, but we think we're going to be okay in almost all worlds. I can't speak for other companies. Again, I can imagine that there may be other players out there who are deluding themselves and making assumptions that are very far inflected on the optimistic side.
We're clear, there's only 2 of you who are not attached to one of the.
I don't know who you're talking about. Okay, I just have no idea.
Let me ask you this about the models themselves and how you see the competition. So one of the things that's happened literally in the last week, and there has been a complete sort of meltdown in the Valley over what's happening here. And Sundar Pichai was also here last year, and it appears at least that his new model has gotten a lot of people excited about what he's doing, and that Google, which I used to think from the beginning, given all of the data they have, should have been sort of the winner by default. And you have a memo that went out from Sam Altman saying that code red, everyone's got to get back to their desk to figure out what the next thing is to get to the next place. How do you stack rank right now where these models are, and how important do you think it is in any given moment?
Yeah, so this is one of the cases where I'm just very grateful that Anthropic is taking a different path, right? On one hand,
the path being the enterprise.
The path being the enterprise, right? Both of the players that you mentioned, right? Both of these other 2 players are, primarily focused on the consumer. They try and do some enterprise work, but they're fighting in consumer. That is the reason for kind of the code red, the intense fighting, right? It's Google has a search monopoly that they're trying to defend, and the center of what OpenAI is doing is in consumer. So those 2 are fighting it out. For both of them, serving businesses is secondary. And so what we found is over time, we've optimized our models more and more for the needs of businesses. The one that's gone the fastest has been coding. I think that has really moved forward the quickest, but we're starting to go beyond that to finance, biomedical, retail, energy, kind of all of that. And so what we find is that these model wars, as much as our models are like really good, like, you know, the one we released last week, Opus 4.5, is hands down, I think almost everyone thinks the best model for coding. So I think it's very important that we continue to have this model superiority, but there's a way in which we're kind of going in a different direction or on a different dimension. And so we kind of have to worry less about this back and forth. We have a little bit of a privileged position where we can just keep growing and just keep developing our models, and we don't have to do any code reds.
But what is the moat around any of these businesses? And when I say that, I assume if Google is as successful as it wants to be, or OpenAI, or Meta, or anybody else who's involved in this, that they think that one day, if we ever get to AGI, that all these models effectively will be able to do what either, you know, any of them do. And whether it's, you know, is there a moat? Is it the persistent memory? So I use ChatGPT for certain things. It knows me now because I've been, you know, asking it different questions. Or do you think people just switch back and forth, whoever's got the latest thing?
Yeah, so look, I can only speak to the enterprise side. What I will say is it is surprising how different the personality and capabilities of the models are if you're building for businesses versus if you're building for consumers. You just focus on different things. You focus less on engagement. You focus more on coding, high intellectual activities, scientific ability, and you know, I don't think it's true that if we got AGI, they would all converge to the same place. Is everyone in this audience converge to the same place? Is everyone in this audience a copy of everyone else because we're all AGI? No, we're all specialized. Specialization exists, you know, it exists alongside general intelligence. And then I think there's all the standard enterprise stuff as well, which is that, you know, companies build relationships with you. They get used to using certain models. And we're starting to see that. Like even our API business, which is basically just selling the raw model, you wouldn't think that would be very sticky. Companies have great difficulty switching from one model to another because they have downstream customers who use the model and they like the current model. And you prompt and interact with the models in different ways and they have different personalities. It's actually quite hard to switch. So I think there really is a durable business here.
One quick AGI question. It's a science question, which is, do you think just the way transformers work today and just compute power alone, from a scalability sense, that is what will get to AGI? Or do you think there's some other ingredient, and maybe there's a technical question, but I'm trying to keep it very, very easy, that has to be included in this, that gets you to some place where this stuff is actually going to really think on its own?
No, I think scaling is going to get us there. Again, with small, every once in a while, there will be a small modification, you know, so small you may not even read about it. It's just something going on in the lab. I have been watching these scaling laws for 10 years.
So what's your timeline now?
There's no one particular point, right? That this is what I've said over. I've never liked these terms, AGI, artificial superintelligence. I don't know what it means. There's just an exponential. Just like we had an exponential with Moore's law, chips getting faster and faster until they could, you know, do any, you know, simple calculation, you know, faster than any human. I think the models are just going to get more and more capable at everything. Every few months, we release a new model, gets better at coding, it gets better at science. Right. You know, now models are routinely winning, you know, high school math Olympiads. They're moving on to college math Olympiads. They're starting to do new mathematics. For the first time, I've had internal people at Anthropic say, I don't write any code anymore. I don't open up an editor and write code. I just let Claude Code write the first draft, and all I do is edit it. We had never reached that point before, and the drumbeat is just going to continue. And I don't think there's any privileged point around. There's no point at which the models start to do something different. What we're going to see in the future is just like we've seen in the past, except more so. The models are just going to get more and more intellectually capable, and you know the revenue is going to keep adding zeros.
Let me ask you a couple policy questions.
Yes.
You have been outspoken. We spoke to the president of Taiwan earlier today. You have been outspoken about the idea that we should not be selling NVIDIA chips, for example, the most advanced chips, to China. By the way, it's interesting that you now have a partnership with NVIDIA. Jensen Huang, who's also been here, was not so happy with you when you made those comments. Do you have a new view on that?
My view hasn't changed. So I definitely will say, and this has always been the case, you know, I have an enormous amount of respect for Jensen and for NVIDIA. You know, Jensen is an immigrant who came to the US with nothing. He built the most, you know, the most valuable company in the world. This isn't personal. This is a policy question. This is a question of how best to defend our national security. And there, my view hasn't changed. It's the following, which is if we go back to my picture of the models getting smarter and smarter as we continue to improve them, a phrase I've used in an essay I wrote a year and a half ago was, eventually the models are going to get to the point where they look like a country of geniuses in a data center. Right. And so once we get to that point, think about what that country of geniuses in a data center can do and which existing country on earth it's plopped down in. If it's plopped down in an authoritarian country, I feel like they can outsmart us in every way. Intelligence, defense, economic value, R&D, and I worry that they'll be able to oppress their own people, that they'll be able to have a perfect surveillance state. And so I have always felt that we need to have the advantage here, and that this is a national security issue, right? Some people are saying this is they say this is an economic issue, that it's an analogy to like the internet or 5G. We need to diffuse our stack, like we needed to beat Huawei in telecommunications. I don't see it that way. I think we're building a growing and singular capability that has singular national security implications, and democracies need to get there first. It is absolutely an imperative.
Do you think it could happen?
If we sell these chips to China, that just makes it more likely that they will get there first. It's common sense.
Okay, but do you think that could happen here? So we had Alex Karp here earlier, and there has been lots of worries about surveillance here. Talk about it in a democracy.
Yes.
Right? What is your concern there? I should say, by the way, there was a period of time where you called the president, this was before he was the president, a feudal warlord at one point. So how do you think about the president today, America today, and this idea that AI and surveillance could come together?
Yeah. So look, I want to say over and over again I think that the tendency to drag this down into being about specific personalities and specific fights, I think, is not helpful here. We should really think at a policy level here, and it's not about one administration. It's not about another administration. We should have principles here, and I think the principle I would give that I think is very important is actually it can happen anywhere, right? We should worry about concentration of power in democracies, not as much as we worry about it in authoritarian states. But we need to make sure that the technology is governed in a way that allows people to participate, that gives people basic rights. And so the formulation I've always given when I think about how to apply these models for national security is I think we should aggressively use them in every possible way, except in the ways that would make us more like our authoritarian adversaries, right? We need to beat them, but we need to not do the things that would cause us to become them. That is the one constraint we should observe.
Okay, let me ask you a separate question, and maybe you'll say it's a fight, but you can take it out of the person if you want, which is you have been very vocal about your concerns about the chip issue, but also what could happen to jobs, regulating this technology so it doesn't do bad things or other things like that. David Sachs, who works as the AI czar at the White House, said this about you. He says that Anthropic is running a sophisticated regulatory capture strategy based on fear-mongering. It is principally responsible for the state regulatory frenzy that is damaging the startup ecosystem.
Again, I don't think this should be about specific individuals, right? This isn't about any particular administration. This is about policy questions. I mean, going all the way back to 2016, I've written papers about AI, right, before I even had a company, right? Before there even, could have been a plan around anything like regulatory capture. And by the way, almost all the AI regulation that we've supported has exemptions for small players, right? The main AI bill we supported, SB 53, doesn't even apply at all to startups with under $500 million in revenue. So we've been very careful about this. And, if there's one point, again, I want to say again, I think people should focus on the policy. You can throw out these accusations and they don't match reality at all. They don't match the reality of the bills we've actually supported. They don't match the reality
but there are these two worlds right now, which is, by the way, Andreessen Horowitz and others have one super PAC. You guys are building another super PAC. to approach regulation of this industry completely differently. And the question is why? What do you see that they don't?
So I, again, I want to keep this at the policy level. How I see this technology, I am concerned, and I can understand where folks are coming from, but I am concerned that there are some who see this technology as analogous to previous technological revolutions, as being like the internet, as being like telecommunications, where yes, there are some issues, but the market will figure it out, which I think was maybe a more reasonable view in these previous technological revolutions. I think those who are closest to AI don't feel this way. If you poll the actual researchers who work on AI, not investors who invest in some AI application companies, not general tech commentators who think they know something about AI, but the actual people who are building the technology, they're excited about the potential, but they're also worried. They're worried about the national security risks. They're worried about alignment of the models. They're worried about the economic impacts of the models. And for example, the idea that we would put a moratorium on all kind of regulation or all state regulation without a federal, without a federal framework for 10 years. Which was attempted in the summer, and I think it was just attempted this last week again, and it failed because it was very unpopular, because even the average person understands that this is a new and powerful technology. And so, I think I am more than, I am maybe the most optimistic about the upsides, right? I wrote this whole essay, Machines of Loving Grace, where I said, AI is going to, extend, it might even extend the human lifespan to 150, 10 years after we get the country of geniuses in the data center, because we'll have a virtual biologist that can make discoveries much faster than we can. That it could drive economic growth to 5 or 10%. I'm incredibly optimistic about the technology. Frankly, much more optimistic than some of people who describe themselves as boosters of the technology. But nothing that powerful doesn't have a significant number of downsides. And we as a society, as a polity, need to think ahead about those downsides. Saying that for 10 years we won't regulate that technology, it's like saying I'm driving a car, I'm going to rip out the steering wheel because I don't need to steer for 10 years.
Okay, so here's the question about the downside then. One of the downsides, beyond hacking and everything else that I know you worry about, is jobs. You spoke about it on 60 Minutes recently. But I want to know not just that you think that there's a good chance, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that it could be, half of all entry-level jobs get lost. I want to know what you think should be done about it.
Absolutely. So, I think at the end of the day, I warn about these things not to be a prophet of doom, but because warning about them is the first step towards solving them. And if we don't warn about them, then we'll just kind of blindly walk into the landmine and it'll blow us up. If we warn about them, if we see the landmine, we can walk around it and we can avoid it. So I have been thinking a lot about these ideas. I've been thinking about them inside Anthropic, where Claude is starting to write a lot of our code, and we're thinking about how the jobs change. So I think there's several levels of it that maybe go from short-term to long-term, or just kind of requiring more and more of the resources of society to happen. I think some of it can happen in the private sector and even in our relationships with customers. Every customer we work with has a following trade-off, and it's not either or. They can increase efficiency by basically having AIs do what humans used to do. And there's plenty of that. Things like, insurance claims processing or know your customer, whole workflows that can just be done end-to-end via AI, and I think we'll need a lot less humans for them. It will increase efficiency, it'll save costs, it'll do the same thing for lower cost and much less people needed. But you can also do things where you can create a lot of new value. And even in cases where AI does 90% of the job, not 100%, but 90%, the humans can be 10 times more leveraged, and sometimes you need 10 times more of them to do 100 times what you did before because it's so efficient and valuable. And so encouraging companies to do as much of the second relative to the first. We know they're going to do the first. We're not trying to stop them from doing the first, but if they can do more of the second than the first, maybe more jobs can be created than get
Does that mean we need government incentives? Is that a policy?
Again, that's level one. Level two is the involvement of the government. I don't see retraining programs as a panacea, but I think we're going to need to do some form of that. Companies are going to do it. Companies are going to have to work with governments to do it. But I do think fiscally at some point the government is going to need to step in. I don't know if that's tax policy, but this world of fast growth, right? We did this report where we said even current models, it looks like they will increase productivity by 1.6% a year. That's almost a doubling of productivity. And the models are getting better and better. So I think we're going to get up to 5% a year, maybe 10% a year. That's a big pie. That's a big pie that we can give out to the people who are not such fortunate beneficiaries, right? If the wealth concentrates, there really is a big pie here. So I think the government is going to need to have some role here. That's level 2. And I think level 3 is, over the long run, the structure of a society that has built powerful AI is just going to have to be different. If we go back to John Maynard Keynes, right, economic possibilities for our grandchildren, right? He invented this idea of technological unemployment. He suggested that maybe his grandchildren would only have to work 15 or 20 hours a week, right? That's like a different way of structuring the society. Some people will always want to work, as hard as possible. There'll always be segments of society who want to do that. But, can we have a world where work doesn't, for many people, doesn't need to have the centrality that it does, that people find their locus of meaning elsewhere, or work is about different things. It's more about fulfillment than it is about economic survival. There's so many possibilities here. I think society is flexible, and society can, I'm not suggesting anything top down. I think society needs to restructure itself. We all need to figure out how to operate in the post AGI age. So I think those 3 levels will go from fast and easy for individual companies to do, to requiring a lot of consensus and very slow to do. But over the years, we're going to need to do all 3 of these things.
Dario, I hope you come back so we can have a conversation as we have to do all of those things to figure out what comes next. I want to thank you for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I think AI will definitely take jobs. Generally, that happens with every technology wave, and then people move on to better, more intellectual things.
Jesse Zhang, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Well, AI agents are talk of the town. Every other company is creating an AI agent to do some sort of task. But what does that actually mean?
So at Decagon, we do AI customer service agents. So a simple example would be, let's say we're working with a big airline. Then essentially what would happen is every single end user that interacts with the airline can use the AI agent as the first point of contact to get whatever they need. And so it's the same as calling a concierge or texting someone, and it can book flights for you, it can upgrade your seats, it can answer questions you might have about your loyalty points. And the reason why it's so exciting right now is that AI is now kind of gotten intelligent enough where it just feels like a human, and you can have it be available 24/7, any language, and it can do all sorts of things for you.
Mm-hmm. How did you get the idea for it? Because Decagon, is one of the few AI agent companies that kind of made it big early on. As I said, now every other startup is trying to find their niche within this AI agent thing. So how did you get the idea for it? What was the story? What's the story behind it?
Yeah, so my co-founder, who's awesome, Ashwin, he and I have pretty similar approaches to starting companies, which is, we think that whenever there's a big technology shift, and in this case with AI, it just opens the door for a lot of companies. But really the number of great ideas is usually pretty small. And so your job as a founder is to try to figure out what those are, ideally at the beginning of the cycle. And the only real way you can do it, besides guessing, is spend a lot of time with customers. And so what we did at the early days was we went out there, we tried to pack a whole day with meetings, talking to all sorts of different just sort of like enterprises, right? So it could be tech companies or banks or retail stores and so on. And we were just exploring. So we were trying to figure out what would people find useful, how would they think about the ROI, how would they think about actually making an investment in AI. And we kind of repeated that cycle for a couple weeks, right? And try to have a full day of meetings, hack on stuff during the night, come back the next day, like, hey, we built this thing, like, is this useful? And that was very helpful. And I think it led us to figure out that there were a lot of use cases that people were excited about, but at the end of it, they didn't really feel like they had real, investment opportunities for them to spend money and actually, invest in something. And so for us, we, went through that process and the idea behind Decagon came out of that. So we had a lot of enterprises that were like, this use case will be helpful, but really over here we have 1,000 people in our contact center. It'd be great if you could do something there. And so they kept pushing us towards this idea, and that's how we started Decagon.
And are you staying focused on, customer service, customer support, or do you think Decagon would branch out of that at some point?
Eventually, yeah. So at the core of what we're doing is we're becoming very good at having conversations. Okay. And so at the core, what Decagon is, it's a conversational AI engine. We want to build the smartest and most human-like and most empathetic agents that can have conversations with folks. In the context of enterprises, that can be a lot more than just customer service, right? You can kind of have proactive conversations. You can have conversations to get people more engaged, or get them to convert into something, or just be like a partner for the end customer. And that's really exciting. I mean, that's where we're going ultimately. I think customer service is the best first starting point, and we have very high conviction in that now, because it's the use case where people are just like, oh yeah, I get it. Like I'm spending 50 million right now. With Decagon, I can spend 10 million. So it's great. But eventually, as we expand, we've already started talking with a lot of our current customers about other types of conversations we can take on. And that's ultimately where we think the industry is going.
Do you have your own models that you're training, or are you working with OpenAI or Anthropic or something like that?
It's a mix of both.
Okay.
So we are in the layer of the tech stack called the application layer, and so that's the sort of final layer that's actually solving business problems or interacting with users. And generally, people in the application layer like us need to be model agnostic. And so you have to use Anthropic, use OpenAI, use Google, and fine-tune your own models. Why would you fine-tune your own models? Well, generally, it's because you can make things a lot faster and more performant and use smaller models. And so for us, for example, when we build our voice agents, and so you can call an agent, it just sounds like a human, it responds instantly. The latency there matters a lot. And so that's when you end up using your own models.
What makes Decagon's agents better than the other ones out there?
So we've taken kind of a unique approach from the rest of the industry. I think generally you can sum it up by we've made our agents a lot more sort of accessible to non-technical users to use.
Okay.
And generally, AI is a complex space. You often have to have technical resources, engineers coming in, configuring the models and setting it up so that you can do what you want. And for us, we've just taken the view that one of the beautiful things with the AI models is that they've really democratized how people can use them. It's super easy to communicate with them. It's very intuitive. And so we built our whole product around that. And so far, that's been resonating with the market.
Yeah, I mean, $231 million raised at a $1.5 billion valuation. That's a lot. How did that happen?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate with our investors. They've been great partners with us. Raising, actually, to be honest, has not really been something we thought much about when we started the company. Okay. We never really sought out funding or went out to raise. I think when we started, Ashwin and I were kind of in the fortunate position. We had exited companies before. We knew a lot of investors personally, and so each one of our rounds actually so far has been preempted, and investors have come to us and been like, hey, we want to give you money at this price. And generally we're like, no, we're not really comfortable with that right now. But eventually, as our business has grown, we at some point are like, okay, it's time to raise.
A little brash, but in one case, I actually did dunk my hand in there. Showing them how it's actually working is really how you make a move into these fields.
Eric, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Pretty excited to be here.
Now tell me what you guys are building at Maverick.
So at Maverick, we are designing, developing, and producing the chemicals needed to extract all the critical resources, whether it be oil, gas, or critical elements like lithium, gold, uranium.
Cool. Tell me about the old way the industry did these things, and then what Maverick brings to the table here.
Yeah, so the traditional legacy methods are pretty disastrous. They're bad for the environment, and worse, they're inefficient. So for certain elements, let's say gold, for example, you have to mix mercury. Mercury is neurotoxic. You get the gold ore, you mix the mercury. In certain locations, they actually still mix it by hand. And eventually you get a gold alum. What we do is we pump in our chemicals. We don't even have to dig a mine. We essentially do in situ recovery, where we dig a small hole, pump our chemicals down, and bring up the gold as if it were water. And so it's much cleaner, much faster, much safer. And ultimately much, much cheaper to produce these chemicals. And we do the same thing with oil and gas. Instead of pumping down sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, pretty toxic chemicals, we just pump in our biologically produced chemicals. That fractures the ore body and takes everything of value out.
Wow. So like, let's go back to gold for a second. I picture this as like a big lump of rock and other things, and the gold's in between.
Yes.
Does your chemicals kind of eat away the rock and just the gold remains?
We eat away and nothing remains. So essentially, we break everything apart.
Okay.
Everything apart, and it goes into a solution. And so it's much faster to move around water, move around liquids, than it is to bring something hundreds of or thousands of feet up from the surface. And so we essentially mine gold as if it were water coming out of a well.
So it all kind of melts together?
Yes.
And then what happens next?
Then we run through a process. We essentially take out all the crud, all of the sulfur, the sulfides, the silicates, and what we're left with is a soup of critical elements, whether it be gold, iridium, which are typically found together. And we separate them based on some are valuable, some are not. Gold, of course, is valuable. And we run it through resins. And those resins allow us to take certain metals of value out.
Wow. What are these chemicals you guys using? Because it sounds, like you said, I mean, this sounds like very powerful stuff. The idea like you're melting rock.
Yeah.
That scares me a little bit. Like, what are these? What are they made out of?
Biology. Okay. So in short, they are proteins. And the way I found them was pretty interesting. So I'm a member of the Explorers Club. Every year I try to go on an expedition. And 2022, I was in the Arctic. So I was in Greenland, in northern Greenland, around Kangerlussuaq. And just how you and I do respiration, we need oxygen. Oxygen has to bind to iron. And so bacteria are the same way. They need iron, but there's no iron up there. So they naturally produce these chemicals, they spit them out, and they melt the rock to take the iron out.
No way.
What I did was I found the bacteria up there, took it back to the lab, and said, how can I overproduce this chemical? How can I make this chemical even stronger? And so I didn't invent it. I essentially found it in nature and adjusted it to fit the industry.
It sounds like these are bacteria creating a tiny amount of the substance.
Yes.
And you're obviously dumping it into mines. I assume there's a large volume of this.
Yes.
How do you mass produce it?
We re-engineered existing infrastructure. So bioproduction is really the thing that's holding back synthetic biology and biology at scale. We can produce very simply a couple of liters here, a couple of liters there. But when you're talking about kiloliters or megaliters, in some cases we're producing for certain mines millions of liters. We actually have to find totally new ways to do it. So one of the cool things about biotech is that it scales interestingly. It doesn't scale one-to-one, just how doesn't matter whether a cell in a mouse or a cell in a great white. Very different sizes, but the cell is the same. Mm-hmm. So we have to change the entire organism. And one of the easiest ways that we found was actually re-engineering sewage pits. So right now, most of the sewage pits in America, where sewage goes to be treated into potable water again, relies on bacteria. So we took one of those, we re-engineered it as a fermentation vessel, and that's what actually allows us to produce as much as we want.
Wow. What is this chemical called?
Lithex.
Lithex.
So lithex, if it's for mine, lithex is from the Greek lithios, rock, and petrox for the oil industry.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
If I stick my hand in this stuff, not a good idea?
Safer than acid.
Okay, so
much safer than acid.
So this stuff can eat rock, but you can transport it, and it doesn't hurt.
Yeah, it doesn't really hurt anything unless it's in the specific oxidation state.
Okay.
So it's much safer, and that's really one of the main selling points. If you are producing and shipping large quantities of acid, of corrosive equipment, that is going to eat into your margins. Mm-hmm. So if we can make a non-hazmat version of these, then we've just eliminated up to half the cost, because half the cost is transporting a hazardous material.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah.
Tell me about, I heard about this, you went on an Explorers Club and you found something, you found a whole new business model.
Yeah.
But your background is biology. Tell me about how you went from, tell me about your background in education and how you got into this world.
Yeah, so my background is actually medicine.
Okay.
Medicine, synthetic biology, toxicology. Before starting Maverick, I was actually working for the military, and we were developing antidotes for chemical weapons. Mm-hmm. So sarin, nerve gas, for example, VX, all of these chemical weapons have a very similar crystal structure to rocks, actually. One is phosphorus, one is silicate. And I figured I'm really good at breaking this stuff down. So we actually made viruses that go into the human body, break down these chemical weapons in situ or inside the human body, and they worked perfectly. So I thought, can we adapt this to break something else? Can we adapt it to break down carbon plastics, for example, or silicates? And yes. And so that's where I got the idea, and I needed to find that base. And that's what took me to the Arctic, and actually took me all over the world. So I try to do one expedition a year. Last year, we recreated part of Darwin's 200th anniversary of the Beagle.
Wow, okay.
So I sailed a couple hundred miles along the Pacific, taking DNA samples from everywhere. Later this year, I'm going to the South Pole. So we're actually sailing from Chile all the way to Antarctica.